At Gale, we make cities for and with people, and as Todd was saying, we're about 70 employees. This is most of us on the street out in the Mission in San Francisco, and I lead these New York and San Francisco teams, but choose to live in Copenhagen. And so maybe the folks that are here that are brave enough to be here at this time of day thought this guy's going to tell us a lot of cool stuff about Copenhagen, and that's going to be great. But I'm not. No Copenhagen. I won't tell you about these fantastic streets that everyone uses, and the incredible investment that happens into the public realm, and people that are walking and cycling all over the place. Lots of cycling. Everybody bikes, probably because it's completely integrated with public transit. I'm not going to tell you any of these things. That people bike even during the winter, and that we have a modal split of about 45% biking, 50% walking and cycling of all the trips in the city, and 63% of people in Copenhagen, Copenhageners walk or bike to work every day. The only thing I will tell you is that it's partially because there's great places to learn how to ride your bike. So this is my son. I could tell you about him. He's pretty cute. You could see his flowing locks. I'm living my hair dream through him. So I will tell you a little bit about him, August, but not about the rest of the waterfront environment. We have about the entire waterfront of Copenhagen is like one big swimming pool. It's completely clean, no guard railing. You can hop in and off any time of year, anytime you want. The Nordic Gini coefficient's incredibly low. That means that Denmark, along with Iceland, Norway, Sweden, all have the lowest income inequality in the world. And basically these elements of affordable housing, good health care, education, work-life balance, these are all basic human rights in Copenhagen, and that's all I'm going to say about that great place. So the rest is more about these three things, which is about the public life movement, which I'll describe what that is, address kind of 4 projects that we're working on, and then the big topic of this session, which was more about challenges for the future. And I'm going to do it really fast, almost as fast as that last section one was, just to make sure that you guys stay awake. So, public life. For us, this is what happens when a collective group of people live their lives outside of their home, workplace, and car. And so this is this fundamental element of being a social human animal. And we know that as Homo sapiens, we're drawn to environments that make us comfortable, right? And because of that social element of our nature, we love watching other people. So it's these micro moments, actually, this term coined by a sociologist, Barbara Fredrickson, that are really what make public life in cities so special. So it's these small daily interactions. Sometimes it's flirting, right? I'm not sure if these two folks are flirting. These folks are definitely flirting. This urban ballet that Jane Jacobs spoke about, you can see in the streets of Seattle. You can see just waiting to cross the street. These small little moments you share with people, whether that be catalyzed by a pet or a kid or some sort of exchange of existence happening in our streets and spaces. Recognizing that we have some similarities. Kids of all shapes and colors play the same way in different cultures, and we also have some real differences that are based on all sorts of problems that I'll speak a little bit more about later. So it is these micro moments. These are the things that drive my work, drive our practice, to try to create environments for these type of scenes to really thrive, for special events or everyday activities. And it is this notion of difference, actually, that I'm the most interested in, and I think the most lacking in a lot of our discussions. Or we're talking more about it, but we're not actually being able to do it yet. So the opportunity to see people that are different than you, to coexist and maybe even interact with them. So Jan's been talking about this for about going on 50 years. He just turned 80. He's written a lot of books. And he's always focused on this notion of, hey, we measure what we care about. So in our practice, we try to make people visible. We actually go out and meet people where they are as part of their everyday routine, and we observe them. We measure them moving, walking, cycling, taking transit in different cultures and spaces. We also measure people staying, what type of activities are taking place. Are people standing, waiting for transit, lying down, being culturally or physically active? We pay attention to that life, and then we also try to evaluate the quality of the environment that life is happening in. So there's a quality criteria assessment, these 3 categories of protection, comfort, and enjoyment that Jan's identified over 50 years of research that show, hey, if you get these qualities, people in general are going to feel comfortable staying there. And we've studied this in 150 cities and many different cultures. And this is fantastic because now it's not only the fields of architecture and design that are really starting to pay attention to place, but it's also in the health field, right? From the presentation before, and you maybe can see this study from the Lancet British Medical Journal released last year, showing that the way we design our cities matters in terms of health. And you saw a lot of evidence of that in the last presentation. But in this case, this shows that just by having more dense neighborhoods, that regardless of where you are in the world, the study was in 15 different cities, 6 different continents, you can invite people to be 90 minutes more active. Okay, so other disciplines understanding that place matters. Also, maybe you've seen this fantastic study, the Equality of Opportunity Project, Stanford economist, showing that where you grow up, the neighborhood that you live in, its characteristics can actually predict the likelihood of you being economically mobile, of moving from the lower quintile of income up to the highest. Brilliant study. I can't do it justice. Check it out. So, place matters, life matters, and we're beginning to add more layers onto Jan's research. We're beginning to try to understand different evaluation methods, right? It's not just observational, but it's also using social media, different surveys, prototyping as a way to really engage people, have them smell, touch, and taste the same type of installation. And so it's all the time this interaction between life and space at many different scales. But what is especially challenging for us now is it's not just about moving, meeting, and the quality of it, it's more about the who. Who feels invited? Who feels welcome? Right? So we're adding layers onto this. This is a publicly accessible whole report with a bunch of different tools in it about how to begin to measure the diversity of life in a place. So I'm not sure if any of you have ever been to Lake Merritt in Oakland, one of the few truly diverse public spaces that I'm aware of actually in the country in terms of diversity of use and diversity of activity and interaction. So what we're doing with this toolkit is we're trying to get a sense of who is actually using a space and then compare that to census data, right? So the black lines here show the demographic composition of a neighborhood close to Lake Merritt, but then we're asking people their home income and finding out, well, who is overrepresented or underrepresented in this public space and why. Things like race, ethnicity, household income level, also education. And again, it's about these micro moments, right? So if these folks that come from different walks of life have an opportunity to have contact, to actually meet and interact, we're trying to understand how that happens and why it can be. So we have this range of sort of passive contact on to other forms of interaction. And at Lake Merritt, you can see a lot of those great things taking place. Here, everyone's just a hippie, so it doesn't matter actually age or race or anything like that. It's all Oakland hippies, which is great. So trying to understand where those activities take place, and again, along the social spectrum, right? So the diversity index is saying, hey, if you're just in a place, passively watching someone else, or are kids and pets being this catalyst for chance encounters, or maybe there's that familiar stranger there that you see every day at the same time of day that you've never spoken to but tells you that things are okay in the world, or maybe it's friends and acquaintances that you're interacting with. So this idea of mixing between people that are similar or different is something that we're thinking a lot about, and is something that actually the fields of architecture, urbanism, and planning aren't completely prepared to do very well. And that's why I think we need to look much more to social science and some existing, older theories, things like contact theory. This is a relatively, old, in the 40s and 50s, hypothesis that said that if you can have intergroup contact, then you can actually improve intergroup relations and reduce prejudice. So what that means is that if you have contact with people that are different than you have less anxiety about that difference, can reduce that prejudice, and maybe even begin to increase things like empathy, which is sorely lacking in our world today. So empathy, this is a tricky one, actually, because empathy is something that is actually, it's a biological response, and it happens automatically, and it's triggered by those who are similar to us. So you'll maybe have seen some of these studies where Asian and Caucasian subjects were shown a picture of someone else like them experiencing pain, and then the brain pain receptors almost emulated that same pain response. But when you showed someone of a different race, then the pain receptors didn't go off. Sort of scary to think about. Now, the minute that they told these subjects the person's name, who they are, they have a family, this is the type of things they do every day, then they were able to see more of that biological response. So you have to have contact with people, actually, to begin to see through some of that difference and be able to have real empathy. The question is actually, should we be thinking more about compassion? Compassion, as opposed to empathy, is something that can be learned. We can be compassionate even if our brain receptors don't tell us one thing or the other. And I was struck by Joe Biden's remarks yesterday about, it's much easier to be compassionate when so many people have shown you compassion. So it's almost creating a sense of empathy, so to speak, right? And again, I'm fascinated by how we can do this in our designs, in our projects, and in our work. So quickly talking about a few cases, just making sure I'm somewhat on time. Boom, 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 wasting time while checking that. Okay. So 3 types of principles, you could say, in terms of addressing these really complex social issues of contact, of empathy, of compassion, and just trying a little bit to make a difference. This is the case in Denver, 16th Street Mall. It's fantastic in a lot of ways, right? Free buses go up and down this street. It's an I.M. Pei design, very iconic. 28,000 people walk along it. It works really well as a transit corridor. And Historic Preservation is also really excited about keeping this I.M. Pei design just how it is. On the other hand, there's some things that really aren't working well at all. Those nice I.M. Pei pavers were never designed to have this many buses go over it every single day, so it costs the city about $5 million a year in maintenance. There's a lot of crime and antisocial behavior that takes place there, and the retail environment is weaker than the rest of the city, which is thriving in so many ways. So we started working with the city, and there was this real issue. On the one hand, everything was great. On the other hand, it wasn't. And so how do we actually break through some of that gridlock? What we suggested is that we try something out, right? So a bit of a pilot, but a really short one. So for just 2 days, back in 2014, the buses were rerouted. They just didn't go down 16th Street. The buses went around on 15th and 17th and allowed something totally different to take place on the mall. So this is a typical day. And when the buses were rerouted and we programmed it, it completely was transformed. Right? This isn't a rendering of like a drawing of people. This is real people on the street after this happened. And we measured the impact. So we found that 30% more pedestrians were there, so that the Sunday pedestrian traffic was almost as high as a weekday peak pedestrian traffic. We found that on the normal days, everyone in Denver ate lunch alone, but then on these days, everyone was outside spending time. You'll see that it was like kind of cloudy that day too, and this one's sunny. So there's still some rendering tricks in there, right? But this is real life impact from just these 2-day tests. So we're gaining a lot of momentum. We're measuring impact. We're showing that there's more retail activity. A lot of people are happy. And qualitatively, folks are even saying, hey, I feel really good about the mall when it looks like this. So everyone's going along in the right direction. And then the bus operators come in who love this street, who think it's working perfectly before, and say, hey, you cute tactical urbanist guys, this is fine, but my bus riders need to know where the bus is every single day, and I don't think we should experiment with our constituents. Super valid point, right? So how could we go through this impasse to really address the issue of this test is showing that things are working well, but there's sincere problems from an operations perspective? In the spirit of shared experience and trying to get people to have a dialogue around a common activity, we brought all these stakeholders out on a Sunday, 2 hours. It's a lot easier to get people out of the office on the weekend, away from their family, than it is to get them out away from their meetings and things like that. Unfortunately, you guys are tired. I'm trying with like little jokes here and there. I'll try to be a little bit more ta-da when I do them. Thanks, there you go. Now you're helping me out. So we get them out on a Sunday, just a 2-hour walk shop to actually, the folks that are against this and the folks that are for this, let's see it together. Because you'd be surprised how many decisions are made in all of your cities by people that have never experienced the decision they're deciding over. So the beautiful thing about this is that we went out there. It wasn't just data. It wasn't just photos. It was real life experiences talking about what works and what doesn't. We took buses. We saw how local artists were being able to put in installations like this. We saw it together. And the grumpy guy in the middle, who had a very valid point, bought us a beer after 2 hours and said, the thing that we have to do here is do it all summer long so that then my constituents know where the bus is going to be and when it's not. It's like, great idea. We got more of the good stuff from him. It was his idea, also in a way that solves his problems just by having some shared experiences. So now in Denver, we're moving up incrementally. It was 1 day, then it was 2 days, then it was, we didn't get all 12 weekends, we got just 12 days, and now there's an effort to do a much more concerted and holistic plan for the 16th Street Mall. So it's less about top-down and bottom-up and more about different perspectives being able to see the same thing. All right, I'm going to have to really speed up. Maybe I'll skip one of my cases here. Another one, Better Market Street. This is in San Francisco. San Francisco I like to affectionately call the home of the Tea Party of the left. If you've ever worked there, it's so liberal that it's become incredibly conservative. So we worked for, well, that one worked. That was good. So we worked there for many years, redesigning this great plan for Market Street, got all these beautiful renderings, everyone was excited, and then found out that we needed to wait like 3.5 years to go through a really intensive environmental review process, and there was no money. And it was like, how do we do something now to actually show the fruits of this labor? So we came up with a concept which we originally called streetlets, sort of growing from the parklet example, these small little spaces along Market Street that could be activated and programmed. Streetlets sounded kind of like bad English from Copenhagen, but Living Innovation Zone sounded way better like San Francisco Bay Area stuff. So these became Living Innovation Zones, partnership between all sorts of interesting folks, university, Exploratorium Science Museum, CBD, the Community Benefit District, different planning departments, and came up with the first zone was basically just handing over the keys to the Exploratorium and saying, hey, do what you want in this canvas. We've identified the canvas. It needs to meet these criteria, but do what you want there. Came up with a brilliant, simple, kind of kitsch idea. These are these listening parabolas, listening domes. And so when you sit and whisper in one focus of the parabola, then the person across the way can hear you perfectly. You've seen that in the Science Museum. What also happens when you're walking along Market Street, all of a sudden you get like a person whispering in your ear, which totally freaks you out, and then you look over and you see some person talking to themselves in this thing, which is kind of normal actually for San Francisco. People talking to themselves in a strange shelter. But it completely sparked, it was this catalyst that I mentioned for people that are different actually meeting and talking, and folks teaching each other about airwaves and sound waves and how it all works together. A fantastic catalyst that then sparked other ideas. So other makers in the Bay Area saw these whispering dishes and say, hey, I've got a cool thing at home in my garage I've been working on. It's called a singing bench. If you complete the circuit on each end of it, then it plays a tune. And so they could bring this to the city, and the city's like, cool, we got a living innovation zone, you could put it out there. In San Francisco, a place where people never get to do anything, all of a sudden there was we started to call it a bureaucracy-free zone. It was a place where cool ideas and energy could be expressed. And so this local maker got to put his bench in, and then all of these folks that don't know each other get to sort of uncomfortably hold hands to be able to get the benefit of the bench plan. Brilliant. We would never think of that. But the area was there, and it invited for great energy, entrepreneurship, and creativity that wasn't present. Now, San Francisco is one thing, right? All this maker culture and things, but we could take the similar type of framework and apply it in other places, very different place. So this is Ward 7 and 8 in Washington, D.C., some of the poorest neighborhoods of D.C., south of the Anacostia River. You see them here, the two blue dots on the south. And again, trying to start this, go to people, ask them questions they're expert in. Don't ask them, do you like design A or B? Ask them questions like, what's your favorite place in your community? And then let's look at the characteristics of that place. Why do you love it? What makes you, who do you meet there? Right? So in this area, we started to build up trust that way. Right? Here's a group, here's a community, predominantly African American. A lot of distrust for the government. They've been left behind in terms of investment for many, many years. And so that helped just begin to have a more constructive dialogue with the community. Had an open call for artists, inviting all local artists to be able to address some of the issues that we learned were real and important from the community. So one was a bus stop, which is always overcrowded. Never enough seats for people to hang out on. So we found the issue from talking to folks, and then had an open call to local artists to do something about it. Here's what it looked like before. Built this with over 100 people, working together with Public Workshop in Philadelphia. 100 people all helped build this new bus stop. And we set the criteria, right? The criteria was it needs to provide a good place to sit, it needs to be comfortable, and it needs to give people information about their community. So a local radio station played a loop of information every 2 or 3 hours, a new newscast, provided a great place for people to sit, to talk and hang out and interact. Before, no place to sit, see that on the left, on the right. Simple stuff. But again, actually responding to real need, making incremental progress towards building some trust and better community relations, and then measuring the impact. Because the folks in the city need to know that these small little investments matter. So being able to ask people afterwards, hey, does this have the potential to be a permanent place? 80% of people said yes. Able to bring in, work together with other groups to be stewards of it. These installations were up for 6 weeks. They needed to be maintained. Enlisted Hope Foundation, young kids in the area that took care of the installations. It became more of theirs. Now, it's important to say that some people didn't like these installations. There were real problems with it. But now we were having a much more constructive dialogue about this thing, about what works and what doesn't, instead of something just based on, again, uncommon experiences coming from different angles. So one more quick case, but I still got more after this, so stay with me. New York City. Everyone's seen Times Square, radical transformation. Mayor Bloomberg, Jeanette Sadiq-Khan, made that transformation in part from our work and analysis that showed that there was no square in Times Square before, actually. It was just traffic islands and road space. Yet when we measured who used it, there was 90% of all the people going through there were actually walking. So this square, it's great. It looks like this now. Snøhetta has done a beautiful design for it. But the thing that's great about this case is that it wasn't just changing Times Square. This gave the city a template to create new public spaces throughout the entire city. So using this super simple model of, hey, if you have a traffic island, you can connect it to building frontage and create a new plaza, was something that was scaled up throughout the entire city. So 77 plazas, especially created in areas that have a lack of open space, have been created through the program. And the beauty of it is that the program inverts supply and demand. So what the city said is they said, hey, if you like these plazas, we can pay to do 3 of them next year. Who wants one? So the platform was for the people that wanted change. If you didn't want it, you just didn't go to the meeting. Imagine that. So the people that spoke the loudest were the ones that were positive. You had to do an application. You had to prove that you were able to maintain the space for 3 years after the city paid to put it in. A brilliant inversion of supply and demand. The city was nervous. They didn't know if anyone would want it. But requests vastly outweighed the amount of capital they had to put them all in, and the program is still going from the Bloomberg administration to the de Blasio administration, and again, changing this dialogue from one about NIMBYism to being much more about, hey, I want that in our backyard. The fantastic organization called IOBI that does this type of stuff all over the place. The Plaza program is a really good example of that. Now, these plazas, again, measuring the impact of it, we knew that they were great for economics, or great essentially for gentrification. Profit was going up in places that were getting new plazas and bicycle lanes. So working with the Knight Foundation and Tony Griffin at the J. Max Bond Center, we tried to study what the impact was, again, on who. Who is benefiting from this? Who's getting left behind? So looking at these 6 of the 77 plazas, we found that people were walking through them, people were spending more time outside after the plaza was put in place, and that more time outside was actually helping people, building social capital, essentially. People recognizing more people from their neighborhood, more familiar folks, more connections were done, and the folks that were benefiting the most from those connections were the lower income people in the neighborhood. So this was something that was not just about gentrification, but it was actually a tactical project that was benefiting the lower income folks the most. So a lot of these cases actually are in this guide, publicly, totally open source, download it, talks about some of these elements, some of these cases, and many more that you can see. Okay, now, the real meat. I don't know how much time I have, but you guys are still with me. So, urbanism for the next 25 years. What are some of the big challenges? For me, the big overarching issue here, and it was brought up at one of the sessions before, is that this whole conference, this whole field, this whole thing is way, way too white. Like, way too white. And I know there was, if some of you were here before, there was some questions about it. Todd and others tried to address it, but it just doesn't matter. It's not good enough. This figure here shocks me, that there are 160 black female registered architects in the country. And this is 4 times what it was 15 years ago. Like, mind-bogglingly bad. Not representing the diversity of the population in any shape or form. It's the same with women, it's the same with planners, it's the same with architects, it's the same with Black, Latinos. It's just not good enough, and it needs to start with education, and it's all of our responsibility to work on this issue. I know that CNU's trying. Everyone needs to try harder, because we're not going to get very far unless we have a more representative field working with communities. Second thing that's related to this is that good cities for people is everyone's business, right? And so I have business in quotation marks. First, it's everyone's business, like they should care across different disciplines. So I mentioned all the social science research before. It needs to be much more multidisciplinary. How many of you in this room are not architects, planners, or engineers? You too? Okay. You're not an architect, planner, or engineer. Okay, that's pretty good. That's better than I thought. You guys kind of ruined my prop there. I'm not, but that's fine. That's good. It still needs to be many more. Cultural anthropologists, behavioral economists, many, many more people need to have this be their business. It's also business about commerce, right? So we've actually been working with Greenfield Labs, which is part of Ford, created this national street service. Fascinating project that has nothing to do with mobility. It's actually starting the other way around. So it's saying, let's talk about our streets, not about AVs and mode, space allocation. Let's talk about the values that we want our streets to embody. And then from there, let's do some tests. Let's empower stewards. We call them, going fast through this, street rangers, that can be stewards of local streets. I even have a thought in my head one day there'll be, just like you have in the Park Service and the Boy Scouts, you'll have Boy and Girl Scouts of the National Street Service that are beginning to have a discussion about what streets should be for, and then we can cater our mobility services around that vision. So about 100 years ago, the car companies got together and decided what to do with streets, and I think we need to actually engage with them more actively again to see how we can shape the next 100 years. And it's not just car companies, it's corporations of all sorts. It needs to be everyone's business, and it needs to be much more diverse from top to bottom. A quick one here also is about sustainability. So I think we have to invert this notion of benefits and co-benefits. All of us, even that work in this field, get nauseous over these regression graphs and sentences like this one. I'll read it out loud because it's so absurd. Present-day BAU projections put forth from the IPCC and presented at COP21 reinforce the UN SDGs as evidence that monitoring VMTs is vital to the reduction of CHGs. If you're talking about acronyms, people don't care. It's not a benefit. We actually have to invert this discussion to talk about the things that are traditionally co-benefits, like jobs and quality of life and cost savings and local energy dollars. So if those become the focus of the sustainability dialogue, then we can have co-benefits that are all acronyms that will be a little bit more effective. So this is exemplified by Copenhagen Cycling, which I showed before. So when we ask people why they bike, they do it out of purely natural, selfishly human reasons. It's the fastest way to get around the city. It's not about exercise or carbon emissions or anything else sustainable, but it's a perfect alignment of them choosing something that is livable for them now also happens to be something that's sustainable in the future. So we need to invert those benefits and co-benefits. Here's another quick idea for the future. If we talk about public life and we talk about civic projects, what if we devoted 20% of the capital budget just to programming? So you have this Pareto principle, that says that 20% of your clients will give you 80% of your work. Let's do that in cities. So if we say 20% of the capital budget will actually probably provide 80% of the value and actually give civic projects some money to do good with, rather than having to scrape things together like so many folks are. You can even see it down at Westlake Plaza. This is fine, but it's becoming a little bit repetitious, and I think if we actually put some real money where our mouth is, we'll be able to get much more authentic, locally powerful programming. There it is. The last sort of challenge, I think, is that we have to be much more active in recognizing that our public realm is a pillar in our democracy. And so it's not just protest, actually. Protest is great. The history of streets have always been a place for protest. Protest on one side of the aisle, protest on other sides of the aisle. Everyone should have a place to do that, and that could definitely happen in our streets, but we need to be able to have a little bit more, again, this empathy question, right, and compassion, and I would love to see our streets used as much to try to understand as we are trying to protest, as much about giving place to other people's opinion as it is about liking those in our little bubble. And again, I think it's our challenge to try to start to do that. This is a great quote. I'm running out of steam. I'm sure you are too. But this is a question of leveraging much more capacity of our entire human race. It's about being much more productive in these conversations, and again, challenging some notions about democracy. So in general, what I would like to see in the CNU going forward is that, yes, it's about landmarks, it's about buildings, it's about infrastructure, but it also needs to be an and issue about public life. So when we talk about walkability, we need to talk more about who's walking. And when we talk about bikeability, it's more about who feels invited and safe to bike. We need decision makers to not only promote landmarks, but to also begin to talk about social impact. We need practitioners to implement these social issues much more in their work every single day, and we most importantly need citizens to demand more than just landmarks and beautiful civic buildings and plazas, but much more of the programming and culture happening there that can truly invite them to be part of their community. So that's the long-winded answer to your last thing of the day. Thanks for listening.